This story is about a boy named Jin who had been left near a trunk by his own mother a few days after he was born. Growing up, the boy was more reserved and timid compared to his peers. For Jin, school was nothing but a hell on earth. That day, as usual, Jin was once again being bullied by his mean friends. Jin had got accustomed to being picked on at school as it was something that he couldn't avoid. Even though the boy had a rough childhood, he was gifted with cleverness, and for that reason, he was forced to do homework for the bullies in class.
Finish all the homework assignments by the end of the day, or else you will suffer unpleasant consequences.
Even the teacher was neglectful of his student, as no one seemingly cared about a child who had no parents. Moreover, the family background of these naughty students wasn't something that one could ignore, as a single complaint from these kids to their parents could ruin a teacher's whole career. As a result, the teacher chose to stay away from any situation that might displease them in order to secure his job. No one would bother to help Jin if they saw him screaming terribly. As usual, every time Jin was bullied, he always got punched multiple times and badly scolded.
You really think the teacher could save you from us? You filthy orphan! Now get your ass back home and do the assignments for us!
Jin could only stay quiet and suffer the punches from them since he knew it would be useless to fight them back. But deep down inside, Jin was holding a grudge towards these kids. For a long time, Jin had possessed a spooky notebook which he always kept with him. Jin brought the notebook out and steadily gazed at it. It looked like he had something on his mind. The notebook looked pretty old. It had a line that said, "Death Note," which was written in a ghostly style. As Jin held it in his hand, his facial expression started changing from the look of his eyes to the way he smiled. The boy looked like he had transformed into someone else. The next day, as the school bell started ringing, Jin followed one of his bullies to the restroom. It was unknown that Jin was up, yet he stood outside, waiting for everyone to leave until there was just him and the boy being there, then went inside. I had finished all the assignments, but the teacher demanded students' parents to sign on their work as a confirmation. The boy was annoyed. He took the notebook in Jin's hands and said,
"Was this small stuff too much for you to handle? Just fake the signature and submit the assignments to the teacher already."
The boy fake signed a signature on the notebook. He didn't even bother to check whether the book was his or not. But the bizarre thing was, as soon as he finished signing, red spots started appearing on the page. The boy's face suddenly changed color, his eyes widening with fear as sweat was dripping down his face. Something that looked like a hand of a demon with sharp nails slowly came out, which looked terrifying. The hand unexpectedly grabbed the boy by his head. He tried to remove it, but he couldn't. A few seconds later, the boy was pulled inside the spooky notebook at Jin's presence. As the boy was no longer to be seen, the light emitted from the notebook slowly died out as the book returned to its initial form. Turned out that it was all Jin's intention. Resenting those who bullied him, Jin had used this deathly item to make them disappear permanently. Jin still acted calmly after he killed his classmate. He even cheerfully greeted his other friends, knowing that he had made a person disappear from this world forever. The next day, Jin was assigned to collect the assignments and handed them to the teacher after class. As a matter of fact, the teacher wanted to know about the whereabouts of his students. The boy's family had made a call to the school, asking why their child didn't come home last night. Since the teacher had previously seen Jin getting into a fight with him, he wanted to meet Jin in private for interrogation. The teacher believed Jin had done something inappropriate to the boy who went missing. Jin was irritated by what the teacher said to him. An evil thought came to his mind. Indeed, he wanted to make the teacher disappear, just like those bullies. Seeing the dissatisfaction on Jin, the teacher asked, "Why not say anything? Answer my questions!" Of course, Jin wouldn't tell his teacher what happened to the boy. All of a sudden, he gave his notebook to the teacher, asking for the solution to a math problem. The teacher made a few complaints at first, yet agreed to help Jin with the assignment anyway. As soon as the teacher wrote down something on the page, something bizarre happened. The demon hand with sharp nails once again appeared to the man's amazement. It grabbed his head and pulled him into the notebook. However, Jin had also written something on it, thus being sucked inside too. Opposite to the teacher being terrified, Jin was extremely calm, as he knew the notebook would let him out anyway. As the two of them had disappeared, the red light from the notebook feebled while things slowly returned to normal. The world they got sucked into was one with books being piled up in huge mountains. It took the teacher nearly 15 minutes to finally regain his composure, yet he was still in utter bewilderment. The man didn't have any idea where on earth he was. Right that moment, Jin appeared from behind, welcoming his teacher to hell.
Hey, is that the thing that brought us here?
As soon as Jin finished his sentence, he saw a creepy-looking book appearing in front of him. It had a bloodshot eye on the front cover with sharp teeth on its edges.
If you want to leave here safe and sound, you must answer my questions correctly. Are you willing to take the challenge? The book said.
While the teacher was still in bewilderment, all of a sudden he saw a student approaching him. The student insisted the two on not taking the challenge. The teacher had no idea why this boy was trying to stop him from taking it. Seeing the confused look on his face, the boy then explained that the questions might seem to be easy at first, but to get them right is a tough task. There were people coming here and deciding to take on the challenges, yet none of them made it out alive. The teacher asked the student if there was any way to get out of this place, but he remained quiet and looked down as the boy himself had been trapped in here for over 5 years. The teacher couldn't control his temper to the utter silence taking over the place. He grabbed Jin by the collar and loudly held at him.
Why are you still standing there doing nothing? Start brainstorming!
But Jin didn't act fearfully. He was chillingly calm as he knew he was the notebook's owner. Jin had a firm belief that he would get out of this place in the end, so he walked towards the book and accepted the challenge. The ferocious book saw Jin suddenly turned amiable. It even bowed down to him. Both the teacher and the student were in sheer amazement. Jin stepped forwards and said, "I accept the challenge." The tongue of the spooky book started moving. It wriggled towards Jin's arms. Despite sensing something bizarre with the book's attitude, the teacher and the student felt extremely worried about Jin. They even told him to stop as the challenge was a matter of life and death. Of course, the book would not let Jin leave the game easily. It instantly opened its mouth wide, then clutched Jin and lifted him up to the other two's absolute horror. However, they couldn't understand why Jin was still looking calm. He even put on a haunting smile despite being in a serious situation. As the book lifted Jin in the mid-air, it said,
Are you ready to answer my questions?
But before Jin took up the deathly challenge, the teacher and the student were completely bewildered. They weren't sure if Jin could overcome this insurmountable obstacle. Having witnessed people permanently disappearing after the challenge, the student believed Jin would end up like them. The book gave Jin its first question, asking him who was the owner of the Death Note. The two broke out in cold sweat as they waited for Jin to answer. But contrary to the anxious look on their faces, Jin still acted strangely calm as he let out a smirk. It looked like he knew the answer to this question better than anyone. Jin made his reply in less than 5 seconds. It is me. I am your possessor. The answer came as a great shock to the teacher and the student. The answer from Jin was totally beyond their imagination. But what even more shocking was, Jin had answered correctly. While the two were still in greater shock, the book moved on with its second question.
Who is the first person that got imprisoned in this world?
The book asked. A question that was thought to be too tricky for Jin, yet turned out to be really easy. The first person that was trapped in this place was none other than the one student behind Jin, who was once his classmate back in primary school. The student grinded his teeth in great anger. He shouted loudly, "Why?" Jin responded to him in his cold voice. "Have you already forgotten what you did to me? You get what you deserve." 5 years ago, Jin was always bullied at school for being an orphan, and one of those who constantly picked on him was his classmate who he sat at the same table with. For some reason, the boy had found out about the Death Note. Since the moment he knew about the deathly book, he had transformed into another person. The boy had secretly put the Death Note into the bully's backpack. But it wasn't just him being Jin's only victim, as many of his classmates also suffered the same fate. The student could no longer hold in his emotions. He shouted loudly at Jin, "What you did was nothing short of murderous! You will pay for your sins someday!" Jin instantly got back at the student, saying he did nothing wrong as it was all their fault treating him like crap. Even though the student was filled with anger, he still asked Jin to stop and help them get out of this haunting place. Jin smirked. He disdainfully looked at the student and said, "Are you still dreaming of getting out of here? You will perish in this place." Jin continued by affirming that he would seek revenge on those who bullied him, just like what he had been doing for the last 5 years. The book asked Jin one last question. Jin's face was flushed with excitement, but it immediately changed color as Jin heard the question from the book.
The possessor would be killed if he didn't make it through the challenge? Correct or wrong?
The book asked. Compared to the last question, this one seemed to be less tricky, but had Jin conflicted with his thoughts. Jin was confident that the book would do everything to his wish since he was its owner. Considered the fact that the book even bowed down to him, it was impossible for him to get killed by it. Jin insisted that he owned the book so he wouldn't be killed. The book slowly moved its eye closer to Jin, opposite to him being calm at first. The boy started panicking as he struggled to escape from the disgustingly long tongue, but the tongue squeezed him tighter, which made him unable to move. Having no other choice, Jin unwillingly offered his answer. No sooner had the boy finished his sentence than blood was seen spilling everywhere. Jin's answer was completely wrong. News about the mysterious disappearance of Jin and the teacher was everywhere, yet no one knew where to find them. Those who were swallowed by the book would never make it out alive. And for the Death Note, it was still being handed to the students that got bullied by a mysterious man who dressed in black. So, is it okay to consider the book a present after all? My husband and I lived in an apartment a year ago when it happened, shortly after I awoke from a coma. Since then, I had a few recollections of the accident, only knowing that since waking up, I'd had to stay at home without venturing outside. And if I left the house, I would have to wear a long coat with a hat so that I wouldn't expose too much skin. My husband said it was good for me, but I still wondered about it.
You need to avoid the sun. It's good for your health. Just listen to me. My husband and I went for a walk today. We met an old neighbor in the elevator who was picking up grandchildren from school. When the two walked in, my husband didn't seem very happy, but I thought it was normal to take the elevator with other people, so I didn't care much. The little girl was very polite, even greeting me when she walked in, which made me very happy, and I then patted the baby's head. When the two of them entered, the elevator had reached the ground floor, so we said goodbye and exited. I was always accompanied by my husband when I left the house during that day, and I had to wear a coat and gloves very discreetly. But as soon as I approached the apartment building steps, a child playing nearby appeared to be about to fall back. I didn't have time to think much at the time, and my hands weren't even gloved, so I quickly reached out to help him. Fortunately, I was able to catch him, so the boy did not fall. This was a critical move. If he fell backwards, it would be extremely dangerous. However, my husband was concerned because while I was assisting the boy, I inadvertently exposed my hand to sunlight. He rushed over and inquired about my hand. "Are you alright?" It was risky. I lied to him, telling him that I was fine and that my hand was never exposed to the sun so he could relax. But only I knew my body. My hand that was exposed to sunlight started to burn severely. Trying to bear with the pain and acting normally, as this was the first time something like this has ever happened to me. Was this why my husband always made me wear gloves each time we went out? That night, after bandaging my hand, I began to think and recall everything before losing consciousness for a long time. What remained in my memory was that my husband and I had gone on a hike in the mountains on the day of the accident. Unfortunately, during a landslide on the mountain that day, a large rock fell from above right where we were passing by. He tried everything he could to cover me, but I lost consciousness and have no recollection of what happened after that. I just knew that I was lying in a bed after waking up, not sure how long I've been sleeping for, with my head hurting. In front of me was my husband. His face had changed so much that I almost couldn't recognize him. According to him, I had been sleeping for 10 years, so he was older. Wrinkles appeared on his face, his features changed a lot. But how come I still looked the same? And why couldn't I go out to enjoy the sunlight with my body so weak since I've awakened? My husband was going out the following day. He would leave for a business trip every year on this day. I didn't know what for or where he was going. I found out where he was going by checking the airplane ticket, but nothing else that I could gather. This happened all the time, so I was used to it. The next morning I assisted him in getting his belongings ready and saw him on his way. Despite knowing it wouldn't work, I tried to ask him about the trip and work he needed to do. Of course, in exchange was only speculative answers as he must go for company business. Before going to bed that night, I texted my husband to check in on him, but when he went on a business trip like that, he rarely used his phone. After waiting for the message for so long, I fell asleep, and even if he did respond, it was only to reassure me without being responsive. That night, I had a nightmare, a horrible nightmare that terrified me greatly. In my dream, I saw my brother crawling on the ground, badly injured. My body froze and I couldn't do anything. All I could do was stand there and watch my brother crawl closer. I could only scream in terror and ask my brother what happened to him in the end, but he didn't respond. Instead, he was just crawling to my feet. Suddenly, he grabbed my leg. It was a dream, but I could still feel his cold hand very clearly. His eyes were bloodshot. His mouth and nose were bleeding profusely. He screamed for help. He appeared to be terrified and was running away from something. I panicked and awoke from that horrible dream with my shirt drenched in sweat. Even though it was only a dream, it felt so real, as if I had to stood there and see my brother. I had a bad feeling about this dream. I believed something really bad had happened to my brother. I quickly took out my phone to see if there was any news about him, but everything gradually turned out the way I expected.
He also posted on social media yesterday that he flew to the same location where my husband went for work. It couldn't be that coincidental. There was clearly something wrong with him, and it could be related to my husband. I decided to take the soonest train to my husband's workplace because of my bad premonition. It was not yet morning and the train had already left. Traveling at night could also help my skin avoid getting sunburned. I couldn't sleep on the train because I was still engrossed in the dream I had that night. My brother's face kept haunting me and his screams for help kept ringing in my head. I was determined to find out the truth because I didn't want to live in this ambiguity forever. I was able to quickly locate the large forest by following the location on my husband's phone, near where we used to go hiking. But now that it was getting dark, the forest was very murky, so I followed the location and went deeper. My hand began to sting, which formed a wound as soon as I touched the tree. I quickly withdrew my hand because it appeared so sudden and painfully. I still didn't understand why touching the trees hurt me so much. I was preoccupied with inspecting the wound on my hand and deciding whether or not to return because this forest was so dense that I would be injured to death. Before I could turn my head, I heard a loud cry from somewhere. I panicked, not knowing if it was my brother or not, so I went through the dark woods, oblivious to the danger. But what I saw in front of me was so horrifying that I couldn't believe my eyes. My husband was tying a man to the ground and appeared to be about to murder him. I didn't understand what was going on and why did my husband have to do such a thing. I was afraid but didn't dare to make a noise. My husband was holding a sharp stick in his hand when the man on the ground was still begging for his life. My husband has completely changed at this point, from a kind and gentle person to a violent person. He then swung the sharp wooden stick with lightning speed, intending to stab the man lying on the ground. The strange thing was that after my husband stabbed the person to death, hideous trees began to grow on his body. He was gradually swallowed by the branches, and he was reduced to a bush of leaves and branches in front of me. I was so terrified by that scene that I bursted into tears. I had no idea my husband was a murderer. My body was trembling. I couldn't stand witnessing the scene any longer. I needed to get out of there immediately. I turned to run away with all my strength, pretending I didn't know anything. I kept running and running, but this forest seemed to be attempting to trap me. I couldn't keep my tears from rolling while running, so they just kept falling. Images of my brother suddenly appeared in front of me, yelling at me for my cowardice. "My sister, kill him! He's a murderer! Avenge me!" And I cried a lot when I heard my brother say that I should kill my husband because he was the one who killed my brother. But I didn't have a weapon and I was not sure how to deal with it all. "Don't be afraid, sister. Use a branch in the forest to stab him to death. All will be revealed." I was perplexed because what I was seeing was just my imagination, or did he really come to show me the way or wanted me to take revenge for him? Then I returned to the scene of my husband's murder. He was standing alone and the other man was nowhere to be found. He seemed to be thinking about something, and this wasn't the first time he's killed someone. Seeing all of this and my brother's words just now, I felt like I was being manipulated by someone, and I was no longer being able to control my actions, so I walked over to my husband and stabbed him from behind. A sharp wooden stick pierced his chest, making him too shocked to react. He turned to face me, looking surprised to see me. I was in such great pain right now, looking at my husband, but this was what I had to do. Then his wound began to react very strangely. There were tree roots growing from the wound, covering his body. Branches were coming out from his mouth. The scene was dreadful. Finally, my husband's entire face transformed into a terrifying-looking dry tree. He collapsed to the ground, his mouth still calling out my name painfully. As I watched what was happening in front of my eyes, I became motionless and terrified, unable to speak aloud. His hands and feet gradually turned into dry branches. What was he, after all? Was this man, who had lived with me for so long, a monster? I had to tremble with fear again before I could regain my composure. His body started to change again, the dry branches gradually fading, and he stood in front of me as if about to be resurrected. And yes, his wound healed, but he transformed into my brother instead. Are you surprised? Actually, the truth is, you're just like me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was it the reason why I'd been in a coma for 10 years and hadn't aged? He stated that our parents will be resurrected and that our entire family will be reunited forever. It's fantastic! Then our entire family will be resurrected and immortalized. When I was thinking of my parents, I got sad because I missed them so much. I agreed with my brother that whatever happens, I wanted my parents to be able to live again. So I listened to my brother without questioning why my husband had turned into him. My brother had changed since being resurrected. His demeanor had become more sinister and cruel. Then my brother led me to a tree. There were two people who were bound tightly and terrified. I heard them begging for help, and I didn't know what my brother was going to do, so I panicked a bit. He just said that this was the way to bring our parents back to life. It was to use other people's lives to resurrect relatives who were buried in this forest. Raising the wooden stake high, it appeared as if he intended to stab them to death. I was so terrified that I stopped him. I didn't believe it was necessary to use this method to save my parents' lives. But he pushed me away and slapped me so hard that I couldn't move. In the end, all I could do was watch him murder innocent people. Screams of pain reverberated throughout the resentful forest. My brother became ecstatic after piercing their hearts with a wooden stake and kept calling out our parents' names. The surprise occurred in front of my eyes, leaving me unable to believe my eyes once again. My brother stabbed two people earlier, and their bodies sprouted roots and branches as well. Then, like what happened to my brother just before, they gradually transformed into the form of my parents. And my parents did come alive. They smiled and called our names, but I still had the feeling that something wasn't quite right. As a result, was it all true that my family had been reunited after all? I felt very awkward sitting at the table with them, even when my brother stood up to ask them about family memories. They still answered everything clearly and completely, and they even called me by my nickname at home, just like my real parents. But I knew in my heart that something wasn't right, that it wasn't them. We still lived together, and my brother got married, but he had completely changed. His wife discovered my family secret one day, so she was apprehended by my brother. She tried to flee but couldn't. Seeing this, my parents came over to restrain her despite her screams. My brother drew a wooden stake from the forest and stabbed her in the chest. She immediately transformed into a tree. None of us could go out in the sun because we wouldn't be able to return to human form, and she was left out in the scorching sun by my family. Since when was my brother a heartless person? I had no idea, neither does my parents. She screamed in agony and transformed into a dry tree. I felt terrible seeing these things. They were no longer human. I tried everything I could to dissuade them, telling everyone to hurry and bring her back inside. But everyone just stood there and watched her slowly transforming into a tree. I was pretty sure this wasn't my family anymore. I was doing such horrible things, but my brother could still laugh. I was not sure what happened to me and my family. I slapped my brother because I was too angry, and I hoped that he could awake from this. I cursed him so harshly, saying that the person in front of me was not my brother. He came to a halt and gave me a sinister smile. "It's our family secret. You want to talk about it? Then he lunged at me, telling me that I should listen to him, otherwise I would end up like my sister-in-law, because they gave me life and I had to accept and listen to them. My mind went blank after hearing these words. They were not my family at all. Thinking about my husband, I decided to return to our home. When I arrived, I entered the familiar home, but my husband was no longer present. The house had never been quieter and more empty than it was right now. The memories came flooding back as I stood there looking around the house. I'm collapsed by looking at the photo we took together when we were happy. Suddenly I discovered a camera in my husband's drawer. Curious, I turned it on. Inside were the videos he took every time he traveled or went for a work trip. And the camera footage recorded from when we were in the accident made me tremble with fear. And so I realized something about the trees. They saved me and asked me every year to sacrifice someone's life and let them take feed on the body. Otherwise, they would take my life back. So he brought many people to them, which was why he always traveled for so-called business every year. Also, it was because of them that I had both the dream and the figure of my brother in the forest telling me to kill my husband. I killed my husband and my family with my own hands. Worse than that, in order to keep my immortality and avenge them all, I had made a deal. My alias would henceforth be known as Girl X.